everything on this slide you should have seen, except for this last bit that was the continuing. Yeah, Jess.
So what would be response outcome
So response outcomes are about operant conditioning, where it's that response and then consequence. In the case of observational learning, it's everything that we just talked about, that you have to be paying attention to see that association between the response and the outcome, that you have to remember the association between the response and the outcome. You have to be able to reproduce that response, and you have to be motivated by the outcome. Everybody good? Okay. So, learning is about changing behavior. We're going to transition from change to stability in behavior. So personality is the next unit. So personality is going to involve elements of all aspects of the biopsychosocial environmental model. And we have a few fundamental questions we want to ask when it comes to personality. I'm sure you have asked yourselves these questions. Why are people like that? Why would anybody do whatever, right? Think back to the very first day of class. I asked you to tell me one question you had about other people's behavior or your own behavior. The field of personality research tries to answer those questions. Not so much about a moment, but about over consistency in terms of time. You may also have these questions personally. How did I get to be this way? Can I change? If we can understand personality, then we can kind of answer pretty much all the questions we have about people. So let's look at first, what is personality? One of those words that you know what personality means, but is your definition consistent with psychologists? So for psychologists, it's going to be a multi-part definition. First thing about personality is it's the part of you that is stable across situations and time. It is the core of you that is the same whether you're in a classroom, hanging out with your friends, at home, on the job. It's that piece of you that is stable and consistent. It's the piece of you that will be stable and consistent over the course of your lifetime after personality is established. So your personality in your 20s is going to be similar to your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. There's going to be some element, some core that's going to stick with you across your life. It is unique. There is nobody in the world that has exactly the same personality as you. There is distinctiveness to your personality. You may share a trait with somebody else. You may have a friend that has a similar sense of humor, for example, but you're still not exactly the same. But the core of what personality is it's a pattern of behavior. And that behavior includes how you think, how you emotionally respond to the world, and how you act in an observable way. I can see your actions and your behaviors. So it's this stable, unique pattern of behavior across situations and time once developed. Now, typically we describe personality in terms of traits. A trait is just one dimension of your personality. So I have a dimension of my personality. One of my traits is I am very organized. Is that all I am? Is that the only thing that there is to me? Your sense of humor. Is that all you are? Or do you have multiple traits? So when psychologists define personality, this is what we use. And it turns out you're not born with a personality. It's not until adulthood that we really start to say we have reached a stable, unique pattern of behavior. Sometime in adolescence, it stabilizes. It's different times for different people. But by adulthood, most people are pretty stable at that point. Doesn't mean there isn't change, but the change is more by a matter of degree versus big wild changes in adulthood. We do see a few things that can trigger significant personality change in adulthood. One is an injury to the brain or a disease process in the brain. We can see profound personality changes after major head injuries, for example. The other is if you have some sort of profound experience, like a horribly terrific trauma, like very unusual circumstances. We can sometimes see a bigger swing in personality after these extreme events. But for the most part, who you are when you're an adult is who you are. Sticks with you. So if we're not born with it, where does it come from? Well, we're not born with personality, but we are born with something called a temperament. Temperament is a pattern in an infant. You're born with a pattern of behavior. Not a pattern of thoughts, because we have yet to determine how to study infant thought. If you can't verbalize it, we can't really fully understand it. But we can study emotional reactions, happy baby, mad baby. And we can study behavior patterns, how the child behaves. Behavior is kind of limited when I'm newborn and I can't move, but I still can behave. And so what we see is that at birth, kids come out different. They're different from day one. They have a different temperament. I have 2 kids. They were night and day different. My oldest, my son, we always make the joke that he never didn't sleep at all until he was 5. He was a horribly grouchy, upset, difficult to soothe, pain in the tuchus, irritated all the time about everything. My daughter, the first night in the hospital, scared the crap out of me because she slept 6 hours. I fell asleep and I woke up in a panic, thinking she had to have died because babies don't act like that. I mean, I was freaking out in the hospital. Day one, completely different pattern of behavior and reactivity. Where did that come from? Probably heavily genetic. Just a genetic tendency to react a certain way. Certainly there could have been some womb experiences, that the baby had, but the womb is a pretty stable place. There aren't a lot of crazy differences in womb experiences from one baby to the next. So we think this temperament is probably largely biology driven. So Kagan initially classified newborns into highly reactive and low reactive. So my son was highly reactive. He was easily, emotionally, and behaviorally upset. My daughter was like chill baby. Broken baby. She likes it when I tell the story of where I thought she was broken. I was like, this one's broken. It's too happy. What's wrong with this one? Thomas and Chess, they actually study different babies. They study different patterns. And they put babies, newborns, into kind of 3 different categories. Some pretty easy. It doesn't mean they didn't get upset, but when they did get upset, it was pretty easy to like figure out what they needed and get them what they needed, and they'd calm down. Other babies were difficult. That was my son. What do you want? I don't know. Let's play Infant 20 Questions. Okay, here. Is it this? No. Okay. How about this? No. Okay. How about this? No. I'm making it worse. That was life with a difficult baby. And then you had these slow to warm up babies that were kind of socially a little bit more distant. And so they were just kind of slow to do that sort of emotional connection with others. Right out of the womb, we noticed these differences. But what immediately happens is the baby's behavior interacts with the environment. And the most important part of a baby's environment is its caregivers. So we see that temperament is somewhat stable and mildly predictive about lifelong outcomes. But what's most important is how temperament and environment work together to mold and eventually set that final personality. And what sets it from the environment is the caregiver relationship. We call your relationship with others, an emotional connection with others, we call it attachment. And so infants' first attachments are with their primary caregivers. Oftentimes this is mom, sometimes it's mom and a combination of other people. It could be somebody other than mom. But who's the person that comes the most? Who's the person that plays Infant 20 Questions with me the most? That's my primary caregiver. And we see that how emotionally connected you are to that primary caregiver, what kind of relationship you have with that person interacts with your temperament, and that eventually molds that personality. So my son, as I mentioned, he was kind of a pain in the tuchus the first 5 years of his life. But he had a psychologist mom. So I would play Infant 20 Questions. I finally figured out that the answer to the Infant 20 Questions was movement. We had to be moving at all times. I walked 500 miles with him. If Fitbits had existed at that point, literally, I probably walked 500 miles. It was ridiculous. We would walk every single day, miles and miles and miles. Because if he got upset, we would go outside. 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd go outside. I got a hammock. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I could swing instead of walk. We'd go outside and we'd swing. So I didn't give up. Even though he was difficult, I was a warm, responsive caregiver. So he did not have an easy temperament. He had a difficult temperament. But because I didn't give up and I kept working hard, he developed a secure attachment to me. Secure attachment is what we see most if kids are easy. It's easy to be a warm, responsive caregiver to an easy baby. It's harder to be responsive and warm to a grouchy one, right? So difficult babies are less likely to have a secure attachment, but I could be born easy, and if you have a neglectful or abusive parent, then that's going to be much more powerful than that easy temperament I started out with. So Mary Ainsworth studied this. She had kind of an interesting study technique. She waited until the kids were big enough that they were mobile, where they could kind of move around a little bit. So she was looking at like 2-3-year-olds as kind of her target. And she set up a little scenario in a room on campus. She set it up and it looked like your typical doctor's office waiting room, right? So think about every doctor's office you've ever been in. There's rows of chairs, and there's some toys over there in the corner, right? She would have mothers, in this case, because that was the most common primary caregiver, come in with the baby, sit down on one of the chairs, not right beside the toys, put the baby down, and then she would just watch and see what happened. It's a strange situation. They've never been in this situation before. Brand new room. Some of the babies clung to mom. Other babies, as soon as they got put down, were zoom over to the toys, never looked back once. Other babies were kind of like, okay, new place. Want to look around a little bit. Walking over here. Mom's okay with this. She's not freaked out. Okay. Oh, there's a cool toy. Oh, I'm going to show this toy to mom. So they were much more interactive, right? Then Mary would have a stranger come into the room. How does the child's behavior change when a stranger walks in? Do they run to mom and cling? Do they even look at mom? Or are they just like, whatever? Do they go to the stranger more than they go to their mother? Then, in the cruelest twist of all, they had mom get up and leave. Leave baby in the room with the stranger for a certain amount of time and then come back in. And they look to see, well, how does the infant react to all these different kind of strange situations? A secure infant is attached to their parent, not so much physically, but emotionally. They use the parent as a secure base. I explore. I check in. Sometimes the check-in was a physically walking back over to mom, but oftentimes it was a looking at mom. Is she looking at me? Saying something so mom looks at me, engaging emotionally in a connection. And we find that people who have secure attachment in infancy tend to have healthy personality traits in adulthood. The children that were ambivalent, sometimes I could care less. Sometimes I'm crying and clinging. I have no security here. The children that were downright avoidant, these would get mad when mom left. And when mom came back, you would expect the kid to like run to mom and be like, Mom, you're back. These kids were not only not running, they were like, whatever, talk to the hand. I'm over here. They tended to have more unhealthy personality traits as they got older. So we think what happens is you're born with this temperament, but then that interacts with this overall environment. And every relationship you have, with that primary first relationship being powerful, but not all powerful, every relationship you have with others takes that clay and kind of molds it until you get to adulthood, and then you're pretty well set. Some changes, but you have the basis at that point. So this is what we think happens to get to the point of personality. Now, when we try to study personality in adults, we have vastly different ideas in the world of psychology. We have not cracked this just yet. We don't have the answer, the theory of everything when it comes to personality.